Welcome to Astrology Night for March of 2015. And obviously, it would be, I would be remiss if I didn't start off honoring my absent partner in crime, Jeff Jower, who I know most of you know transitioned into some other dimension just a couple of weeks ago. And so we are here tonight, Jeffless, but only in body, certainly not in spirit. And without belaboring the point, it's very important that we honor Jeff by living our lives as fully and completely as we can, as he would have us do. I know that those of you who were here last month, while he was still in process of transitioning, I talked a bit more extensively about that process. And needless to say, this has been a very intense and dramatic month, and although it certainly is on one level heartbreaking and sad, that's only from my or our selfish human points of view. Death is a process that we each will do in our own time. And Jeff, as he was a teacher in life, is also a teacher in his process of leaving the planet. It was a very sacred and magical and powerful period of time to share with him and his lovely wife, Danique, who's probably trying to remain invisible over here. And not necessarily. And it's just been a very powerful period of time, and it will continue to be. Also, I just want to say that the celebration of Jeff's life will be occurring on Sunday, March 22nd. And if you want to find out more information about that, it will be held at the Daybreak Star Center over in West Seattle. And if you go to the homepage of Star IQ, STARIQ.com, there's a link for more information there. And Danique and family are asking that if you are attending to please RSVP, just to make sure that they have a count or know approximately how many people are coming. So, did I miss anything? Are we okay there? Well, as I started to say before, this is the March Astrology Night at SoulFood Books in Redmond, Washington, and we are here to talk about the astrology of the month ahead. And all I can say is, oh my God. I mean, even on quiet months when nothing is happening, there's always something of interest. This month is a rock and roll month. I mean, in a way they all are, but this is in particular, there's several very large scale astrological events happening this month that we will get to and we will talk about in due time. But I want to put the three main things out there before we dig deeper into the month ahead. The three things are: 1, the seventh and final square between Uranus and Pluto. For those of you who have been attending Astrology Night on a regular basis over the last 6-7 years, have heard us talking about the Uranus-Pluto square for at least 5 years at least. Almost on a monthly basis. Well, starting next month, we won't have it to talk about anymore. On one level. And I want to say more about this in a moment, because it's important to understand that although this aspect has clicked in and out of being exact 7 times since the summer of 2012, the fact of the matter is we're going to be feeling its ramifications for years to come, and in fact the intensity will still build even though the aspect itself will begin to wane. So number one, Uranus square Pluto. We'll drill down on that in a bit. Event 2 is this month we have the second of 3 occurrences of Jupiter trining Uranus. Now note, this is the second piece that Uranus has been involved in. Uranus is squaring Pluto, but at the same time, Jupiter, which is a much faster moving, slow moving planet, because Uranus takes 84 years to go around once, and Pluto takes a quarter of a millennium, nearly 250 years to go around once. Jupiter, on the other hand, takes 12 years to go around once. It spends a year in a sign. In fact, astrologically, Jupiter is the planetary rhythm that is most likely the basis for the 12-year Chinese astrology zodiac, because Jupiter spends 1 year in each sign. Interestingly enough, the culture of China is very Jupiterian, because Jupiter is the planet of social awareness rather than individual awareness. Anyhow, this month on... today. Actually, technically it was yesterday, but it's yesterday, today, tomorrow, that Jupiter in mid-Leo is forming a harmonious trine to Uranus in mid-Aries. We'll say more about this in a moment too, but this is also a slow-moving outer planet aspect that has a gradual effect rather than an immediate effect. The third thing that occurs this month actually occurs this month and next month, technically, and it is eclipse season. For those of you who know astrology, you know that eclipses, like Mercury retrogrades, get a bad rap. You know, the ancients feared eclipses. In fact, the solar eclipse was the king must die. I mean, this was a fall from power. This was a transition that was unexpected. And this year we have, as many years, we have pairs of eclipses. This year, the first pair of eclipses, and that's a lunar eclipse followed by a solar eclipse followed by a lunar eclipse. And the solar eclipse, which is a new moon eclipse, is on March 20th. And then the full moon eclipse is on April 4th. And although that's technically not until next month, and we will be meeting here the 1st of April, so we'll talk about that eclipse more in depth, the fact of the matter is that this is eclipse season. So we have 3 major things to consider, and yet they're all important and they're all interesting. The real powerhouse of event, not only this month, but for the last several years and for the next few years, is the Uranus square Pluto. And so I would like to start by just spending a moment with a few slides from a presentation that I've done in a number of places called The 60s Inside Out, just to help you understand the intensity of what this Uranus-Pluto square is. Now, astrologically, you can take any 2 planets and look at the cycles that they make as the faster moving planet makes angles to the slower moving planet. The primary example, the observable example of this, is the lunation cycle, the new moon to full moon to new moon to full moon cycle. The moon is the faster moving of the 2 planets, and when I use the word planet, I use it in the Greek sense of a wanderer, not in the modern astronomical sense that might even exclude Pluto. However, the faster moving planet or object, the moon, once a moon catches up to the sun, We call this a new moon, and at the new moon, that's the beginning of the next lunar cycle. Halfway through that cycle, at the full moon, there is a culmination of energies. And in fact, the halfway point between the new moon and the full moon, and the halfway point between the full moon and the following new moon, these are the quarter moons, and this is the most dynamic point of change in the cycle. Now, we can observe this by watching the moon, and I don't know how many people actually saw the full moon tonight. It's actually full early tomorrow morning, but this is as large as it will be. And the full moon tonight, if you just, in fact, I just stood out in the parking lot before I came in, because sometimes we astrologers can get so lost in our heads that we forget that this shit's real. And off to the west, where the sun had just set, the brightest object in the sky tonight, and it will be there tomorrow night and the night after, is Venus. And then if you follow an arc from Venus to where the moon was rising on the eastern horizon, just between the moon and Venus, just up from the moon a bit, was Jupiter. And you could stand there and trace the arc from where the sun went down to Venus, to Jupiter and the moon, and that's the ecliptic. That's the highway that the planets travel on. That's the zodiac in the sky. It's real stuff. But back to the Uranus-Pluto. So we can look at any cycle and see the seed of that cycle by looking at the new moon or the new moon phase. It might not be it could be any two planets. But the new moon phase is at the conjunction, when the faster moving planet catches up to the slower moving planet. The first stress with the lunar cycle, it's 1 week later, because a week is 1/4 of a cycle, 2 weeks or a fortnight is a half a cycle, 3 weeks is 3/4 of a cycle, and 4 weeks is the next new moon, or the ending of one cycle and the beginning of the next. So here we are at a time where we're experiencing Uranus squaring Pluto. And we astrologers would look back to the seed for this cycle when Uranus and Pluto were aligned or conjunct. It's like their new moon phase. Even though it wasn't a new moon, it was really like a new Uranus to Pluto. But it's the same concept. And it turns out that Uranus lined up with Pluto, as it does once every century and 2/3 roughly. Uranus lined up with Pluto in the mid-60s. Doom, doom. Doom, doom. Doom, doom. In fact, Uranus lined up with Pluto in the summer of 1965, and then again twice in the summer of 1966. Now, for those of us who are either cultural historians or actually lived through the 60s, we know that the most intense part of the 60s was not necessarily 1965 or 66, which was the summer of love in Berkeley, but 67, 68, 69, 70, it didn't start waning until 71, 72. And from that same point of view, we need to understand that although Uranus and Pluto have now been square 6 times, and their 7th square is on March 16th, but they're close enough that we're feeling it all over right now. And I'll explain how in a few moments. But the fact of the matter is, just like the Uranus-Pluto square of 1965, the Uranus-Pluto conjunction of 1965 and 66, which we didn't feel in its full ramifications and full experience. We didn't feel that fully until 66, 67, 68, 69, politically, economically, socially, culturally. And by the same token, even though the 7th and final Uranus-Pluto square occurs this month, it will be years until we feel the fullness of whatever it is that's going on right now. And I know some of you may have heard me say this before, but I remember freshman year of college taking earth science and learning what we call the lag of seasons. Anyone know that term? Do we know that term? The lag of seasons is why December 21st or 20th isn't the coldest day of the year. And it's why July or June 20th, the first day of summer, the day where we have the most sunlight, isn't necessarily the hottest day of the year. Not necessarily, it just isn't. And the reason is that it takes months for the heat to cool off. And so we have the coldest days of winter in many places in January or February, not at the end of December. And we have the hottest days of summer in the Northern Hemisphere, not in the end of June, but already when the days are getting shorter, in late July or even in August or even in September. It's the same lag of seasons that can be applied to understanding why the biggest and strongest effects of the Uranus-Pluto square may not be felt for another year or 2 or 3 or 4. We have the social implications to play on through of what we've seen come out over the last few years. As planetary cycles affect the affairs of individuals, so too do they inform cultural affairs, the rise and fall of civilizations, and the evolution of ideas and technology. For those of you who want to dig more, the encyclopedic book on this subject is a book by Richard Tarnas, called Cosmos and Psyche, Intimations of a New World View. And it takes a look at these outer planet cycles in incredible depth over the centuries, and analyzes what the historical implications of this has been in the past and is now. We're just focusing on one rhythm here right now, and that's the rhythm of Uranus and Pluto. And I just want to make a parallel by looking back in history and making a note that Uranus and Pluto, Uranus, this symbol that looks like an H, and Pluto, the circle nested up above the crescent of receptivity. These two planets aligned in 1455. And when Uranus and Pluto align, it's almost always associated with cultural breakthroughs, with technological breakthroughs, with important events that have ramifications that last for years, even centuries. What happened in 1455? Do we have any history buffs? The what?
The revolution.
No, there was always a revolution every year. Gutenberg printed the Bible. It was the Gutenberg press. We're talking technology here. And the importance of the printing press as a formative technology for our culture cannot be understated. In fact, I would refer anyone who is interested to a Marshall McLuhan book called The Gutenberg Galaxy, Understanding Technology as Extensions of Man. It's a brilliant book. Now, in 1455, there was a Uranus-Pluto conjunction. And this set in motion the literate society that we are a part of. In 1965 and 1966, at the Uranus-Pluto conjunction then, we had IBM come out with the first business computer, like a digital printing press. And the analogy here is very important because just like it took centuries for us to really understand the ramifications of the printing press. I mean, we don't associate the printing press with the Protestant Reformation a century later. However, if the printing press wasn't printing stuff like Plato and like the Emerald Tablets, the Corpus Hermetica, and this incredible stuff that Rome was not interested in getting out to the people, there would have never been a Reformation. And by the same token, with the digital printing press and the ensuing World Wide Web and the proliferation of the library of information that we have, once again, the powers that be, then it was Rome, now it's the corporatocracies, have lost control. It may take 50 years or 100 years for this to play on through, but make no mistake, the event of this Uranus-Pluto conjunction in 1955-56 was just as important. And then we come up to now, and when I say now, the first of the 7 Uranus-Pluto squares was on June 24th, 2012. And because the Earth is moving around inside these very slow-moving outer planets, they look like they shift into place and out of place and in place and out of place because of the perspective of the Earth's view on them. And these 7 exact squares were June 24th, 2012, September 18, 2012, May 20th, 2013, November 1st, 2013, April 21st, 2014, December 14, 2014, and coming up March 16th, 2015. These 7 events are the key points in a much larger cycle that really began back around 2010 and will last pretty much till 2018-19 or so. What's important to understand is that in the 60s, we had a cultural phenomenon that is now very well noted, and it involved an entire change of perspective that involved music and art and philosophy and a way of looking at the world that is very different, or was very different than what went before. And in fact, it's these same things that are coming back into light now. And we've talked about this here from the same stage over this last year. In the 60s, we had revolution in the streets. During this Uranus-Pluto square, not that they ever went away completely, but we had the Arab Spring and the Occupy Wall Street and the Occupy everything. We have that same feeling of the individual against the corporatocracy or the power structure. But now it's not just students in Chicago or at the Sorbonne in France. It's all over the planet. Secondly, we had the rise of the use of mind-altering substances in the 60s. And now with recreational legalization and medicalization, those issues are back again in a major kind of a way. In the 60s, we had the rise of the modern feminist movement. And now with the issues of and legalization of gay marriage and just issues of gender identity and gender equality, these things are now back in our face again. Again, not that they ever went away completely, but they're huge back. In the 60s, we had the rise of the modern ecological movement. We had the first Earth Day and those kinds of things. Now we have the issues of GMO and global warming. And again, it's not that those issues have ever gone away. They're just back big time. There are many other things too, but those are the ones that come to mind. And I think those are some of the most important things. So the idea here is that those things that were a seed back in the 1960s, at the square, the astrologer Dane Rudhyar, who was a Jungian and kind of opened the door to what we moderners now call humanistic astrology. Dane Rudhyar called the opening square, the first square after a new moon, as a crisis in action. In other words, those things which came into being at the seed, at the new moon in the 1960s here, are now reaching a point of maximum stress And reality determines which of those things have staying power and which of those things get lost in the shuffle of history. And that's the sense of urgency and the sense of excitement and the sense of despair. Oh, and also I just want to say I left off certainly a huge thing in the 60s was the Civil Rights Movement and the Civil Rights Act. And now we have, in just today, the Justice Department and its analysis of Ferguson and what's going on again with the civil rights in the United States and all over. So, one of the two planets involved in the Uranus-Pluto square, obviously, is Uranus. And I just want to I have a few slides on Uranus. I don't have them for Pluto, but I just want to paint what Uranus really is. Because I view Uranus as the planet of lightning. In other words, it's like fire, but it happens instantaneous. It's electrical. Uranus is sudden acting, like lightning. Uranus's action is to release tension that's been built up, whether or not we know the tension is there. In fact, the more irresolvable the tension is, the greater the strength of the lightning when it strikes and resolves it. As paradoxical as that sounds, it is. Uranus's job is the instantaneous resolution of irresolvable opposites. And so we have Uranus right now creating these events, these sudden occurrences that we just don't expect. And I know you've heard this said from this stage before, but on the day in March 10th, I think it was, 2010, on the day that Uranus moved from Pisces into Aries, where it began humming the square to Pluto in Capricorn, on that day was the Fukushima earthquake tidal wave meltdown. Did I scare you? Good. If Uranus doesn't scare you, it ain't Uranus. So we have this suddenness of Uranus, but it's also the kapow of awakening. In fact, Uranus is called the awakener. It opens our mind. It breaks down the walls of Saturn. Saturn is the constraining energy, and it's the limits. And Uranus is like kapow. It breaks those walls down, and for a moment we can see forever. It's the brilliant idea. It's the aha experience is Uranus. Uranus the awakener. But here's the interesting thing. As above, so below. The inside is like the outside. The two are the same. They appear different. They appear one as a reflection of the other, but in fact they are the same. They are one and the same. And lightning on the outside is the nervous system on the inside. You know, the nervous system, like lightning, is electrical. It was Benjamin Franklin who first kind of had his aha experience that lightning was actually electrical. And it was Galvani that, you know, the whole idea of stimulating a dead frog with electricity and watching its nerves twitch. The fact is that our nervous system is Uranian, is electrical also. And nervous impulses are in fact carried like little bits of lightning, if you will, biologically. And then we have a picture here of Nikola Tesla sitting in his laboratory generating lightning. Anyhow, that's those slides. But I wanted to give you an idea of what this Uranian energy is like, because the things that are happening in the news. Oh, and you know, also, I'm sorry. I mean, there's the things that we forget standing here on stage. Okay, the things that I forget. I would like to share the blame with all of you, but thank you. The other little event in the 1960s was, the war in Vietnam. And in that war in Vietnam, we had a playground or a sandbox where the two biggest powers in the world were basically having a wrestling match, a pissing match, a who's more powerful or whatever. But it was so dangerous it needed to be contained somewhere where that didn't matter to us, so to speak. Obviously that's ridiculous. But again, we have, after years, after decades of quietness, we've re-entered a Cold War with the same country. And we have what's going on right now in the Ukraine, in the Crimea. And in some ways, it is like a Vietnam redux. And so it's just another piece of the puzzle, and how these events keep getting stirred up again and again and again. On one hand, we have Uranus kind of bringing these events up where there's tension that's been ignored or brushed under the rug, or in our bodies we take tension and we bury it, whether it be in our ulcerated stomach or in our heart attack ready, heart, or in our stroke, or in swelling in our ankles or our big toe gout, whatever it is. We take our stresses and tensions and we bury them. And then Uranus comes along and goes, we got a problem. That's what we're seeing right now, culturally and socially and economically and personally. And that's where we want to come full circle to, because although we're talking about, up till now, all of this on a global cultural level, the fact of the matter is that what happens out there is no different than what happens in here. And the only way to cure these big events is to work simultaneously on the outside and on the inside. And this is a basic Jungian concept which actually corroborates Mahayana Buddhism, for those of you who care. Jung wrote that the salvation of the world will not come about by politicians signing treaties. It will come about by the salvation of each individual person in the world. It's Mahayana Buddhism. No one gets off until we all get off the wheel. So this is part of what we're dealing with. And when it comes to these big issues that we have no way of impacting on a personal, one-on-one level, the fact of the matter is we each have relationships with our parents, with our children, with our husband, with our wives, with our friends, with our lovers, with our employees, with our employer. And it's cleaning up those relationships by cleaning up our internal ecology that makes the global changes happen. So, let's dig into a little astrology. Not that that wasn't astrology. The other planet, by the way, that has been implicated in this square, because we've been talking about, Uranus and Pluto. We talked about Uranus, is Pluto. And Pluto is just Latin for Hades, which is Greek for hell. And here I'm obliged to do what I like to call my brief Christian disclaimer. And that is, when I use the word hell, I don't mean the Judeo-Christian place where one goes in an afterlife to be punished for following the energies of one's body rather than following some higher idealism. What I mean particularly, and I wish I could take credit for that line, but that's a William Blake line, just to be perfectly clear. It's from The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And if you don't believe me, Google it. But what I mean when I talk about Pluto or Hades or hell is that place that William Blake wrote is a place, quote, so beautiful that it would drive an angel to insanity. You see, in the hell realms, this is the magic of transformation. This is the hell realms are where the caterpillar becomes a butterfly. It's dark, it's hidden, it's mysterious. It's after the death, quote unquote, of the caterpillar and before the emergence of the butterfly. It's what happens in the bardo states of existence that we in our earthly plane don't normally think about. And for those of you who don't know the word bardo, B-A-R-D-O. It's not Bridget with a T on the end. It's a Tibetan concept that has to do with the states of existence that are disincarnate, meaning there's no physical substance. Meaning this is what happens when we die physically. As I like to say, when you break the radio, the broadcast station hasn't gone off the air. The radio breaks. Two different things. But from the West, we associate death with because we believe in what Deepak Chopra calls the superstition of materialism. We believe the radio is all there is, and that if the magic of song isn't coming from within the radio breaks, there is no magic of song anywhere. Nothing could be further from the truth. So Pluto is the understanding that when things end, whether it's the end of a concept, the end of a relationship, the end of having a physical partner on stage to work with, it's all, from an astrological point of view, Plutonic, in as much as when it ends, it doesn't really end. It just transforms. From a very selfish and personal point of view, this isn't about the end of my relationship with Jeff. It's about the transformation of that relationship. It's about making friends with him in a different way, working with him in a different way. So, Pluto's role in all of this is significant because Pluto is the key in understanding that these cycles continue to go on. And this is why these times are so profound and so powerful. It doesn't matter what happens right now in the Crimea, or with GMO labeling, or with or what happens in Ferguson, or what happens with the Obamacare. We may have points of view on every issue, but the fact of the matter is, from a larger perspective, all this stuff is going to continue going on and morphing and changing and evolving. That's Pluto. So let's come back a little bit to the chart for now. We have the chart for today, March 4th. And there's a couple of things of significance. First of all, as you know, or many of you know, the lines in the middle here represent sacred geometry, or aspects between the planets. The red lines represent stress or tension, or we astrologers call those angles squares, or oppositions. The blue lines represent trines, or half-trine sextiles, which are a flow of energy that is easier. And the green lines represent an annoying aspect called a quincunx, 5/12, Latin for 5/12, that represents a kind of anxious, annoying, irresolvable. I always think of it as the mosquito in the tent that you can't find. But every time you start to doze, it's back. You know what's worse than hearing it stop? That's a quincunx. Anyhow, so what we have here is we have Uranus at mid-Aries, 14 degrees of Aries, square to Pluto at 15 degrees, within a degree in Capricorn, and over the next week and a half, this Uranus will move to the same degree, to 15 degrees, and that square will be exact, but it's already so close that it doesn't matter. For all practical purposes, it is already exact. From a cosmic point of view, it's now. The other fat line, and the fatter the lines, the stronger the aspect, is the trine between expansive, opportunistic, exaggerating, excessive Jupiter and Uranus. Now, Jupiter and Uranus are two planets that kind of get along because they're both expansive, they're both young, they both have to do with opening up. Jupiter's like a magnifying lens, and it opens things gradually. It's philosophy, big ideas, it's publishing, it's traveling to foreign places, it's anything that's far away. Jupiter is when you look at a star in the sky at night and you think cosmic thoughts. That's Jupiter. It stretches our mind. Uranus does the same thing, but it does it now. It's instantaneous. But it's the same kind of expansive energy, but there's no process involved. It's like electrical, it's either on or off. And so when Jupiter trines Uranus, we imagine that we see more potential, we have more openings, we have more ideas than we have at other times. And so even though these times are difficult and there's lots of stress, particularly from the Uranus square Pluto, the fact of the matter is that we're also getting a taste of something bigger. And this Jupiter trine to Uranus, although it is exact now, yesterday technically, it was exact last fall, the end of September, and it will be exact for the third and final time on June 22nd, 2015, coming up. And so we may use these cycles by looking back and thinking, what were the big ideas that I was having in September that maybe didn't come to fruition, that I haven't followed through with yet? Because those same ideas may be back on us now, but they may take until June or even July until they actually follow through in form. Because these three occurrences of this, of which we're in the middle of it now, are all, from an astrological point of view, one event, even though we get it from three different points of view. So, the other piece that's very significant in all of this is that Venus and Mars had been traveling together, and if you remember from last month, I'm backing this up to February 19th, 20th, when Mars, followed by Venus, moved from Pisces into Aries, and then they joined with one another. And now Venus is moving faster, so you can see her separating from Mars. And right now, Venus today caught up with Uranus. And you can see, if I go to yesterday, how Venus is on one side of Uranus, and then you can see it jumps to the other side.
Rick, look at your screen.
Tech support, please.
Do it again now.
All right, so if we back it up, we can see that Venus and Mars were traveling together as they moved into Aries. And then Venus, that's this one right here, is moving faster than Mars. And so you can see Venus pulling away until Venus actually lines up with Uranus and then jumps to the other side. The exact Venus-Uranus conjunction was this morning. Venus is attraction, it's desire, it's love. Venus is the goddess of love, it's beauty. And when Venus lines up with Uranus, that's an odd combination, because Uranus is electric and kind of, Uranus is detached. It's emotionally detached. Uranus is electrical without heart, even though the heart is electrical. Uranus is the electrical impulse. And so when Venus lines up with Uranus, we are attracted to things that are normally out of reach or out of the box or out of our social context, or we like the idea of doing things in a different, unique way that is not the same way as we normally do or that we should do. I think of Ram Dass's line, "I've been should upon long enough." Venus-Uranus says, I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to feel attracted to what I feel attracted to, whether or not I should act on it. Now, we don't necessarily act on all of our feelings, and that's good news. But when Venus lines up with Uranus, we certainly feel that attraction. And of course, because Venus is lining up with Uranus, it's also, over the past couple of days, or actually also this morning, also formed a harmonious trine with Jupiter. So we're really in a 2 or 3 day reprieve, yesterday, today, tomorrow, of some of the intense energy that we've been experiencing. However, it's not enough of a reprieve to make the serious stuff go away. And we're coming into a full moon later tonight or early tomorrow morning, depending upon where you are, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But I want to stick here for a moment with this alignment of Venus lining up with Uranus and trining trining Jupiter and squaring Pluto. Can you kind of see how there's a little dance going on here? that involves this annoying energy between the optimism and expansive and the dramatic expression of hope, that's Jupiter and Leo, quincunxing Pluto, while Venus is saying, I can feel anything, I can go anywhere, and yet Pluto says, oh yeah, well that brings up deep shit that you may not want to bring up. And if you do, then you have to deal with it, which is okay, but it's not necessarily easy. And yet, there's this undying hope attached to it. Now what's significant here as the month progresses, watch Mars, and Mars catches up with Uranus, and the Mars-Uranus conjunction occurs on March 11th, and it actually trines Jupiter just a couple days before that. And so you can see we're in this week or two period of first getting the Venus, the idea that things are going to be nice, and that maybe we don't have to follow all the rules and we can do things our way. And then Mars, the action planet, comes through and says, yeah, go ahead and do it. Be weird, be eccentric, take a risk. And yet that Mars is also going to square Pluto, also right in that same period of time on the 11th, which means, once again, yes, it can sound good on paper, and we may take a risk, and we may do something very different. We may be the lightning and actually strike, and yet there still are consequences. So now let's back up and take a look at the full moon, which, let me just add in the lunar aspects here. Aspected points, and we will add in the moon. And we will move this forward an hour at a time until that moon reaches the same degree. There we go, close enough. And there is the full moon, the exact time of the full moon here in Seattle is
10:36 a.m.
Is what?
10:36 a.m.
Actually, I have 10:05.
Oh, okay.
10:05 a.m. Regardless of what this shows here.
You're right, 10:05.
Anyhow, the moon in Virgo opposite the sun in Pisces. All full moons are like a tug of war. With the moon, our emotions, our feelings, our responses pulling one way, and the drive and the light pulling another. In a way, it's a tug of war between the objective sun and the subjective moon, the inner and the outer. Here, the objective sun is in totally spaced out, intuitive, emotional Pisces, not very objective. And the subjective moon is in analytically precise Virgo, not very subjective. So we have a weird flip here of the basic concepts of what is personal, subjective, and what is apersonal and objective. And yet somehow what we're confronted with during this full moon is, how do we react? That's the moon. How do we respond in a limited and precise and exacting form that ultimately allows for the most compassion and the widest range of experience? That would be the sun in Pisces. Now, at any new moon or full moon, we look to the aspects of the moon to see what the other flavors are of this lunation, in this case a full moon. And we see that the full moon is also trining Pluto, which deepens the energy and makes it more powerful, grounds it, and ties us into this kind of evolutionary cycle of there's more going on than meets the eye. There's stuff that's going on in hidden realms that we may not realize that have great impact and power in this realm. And yet that moon in Virgo is also quincunxing the Venus, Uranus, and Mars in Aries. And so in a way what this is doing is this is making us aware that our impulses, the Aries, the fiery energy of that Venus and Mars and Uranus that wants to just do it its own way now, in some ways is working at odds with the more analytical and correct and precise way that we might have all this figured out in our minds. So this whole idea of this full moon that we have tomorrow morning, in some ways, is bringing the attention of the differences between how we would like to respond ideally and how we actually respond in reality. However, this full moon is not the major action of lunations this month, because the following lunation 2 weeks later at the new moon is an eclipse, and we will get to that momentarily. In the interim between the full moon on March 5th, if we follow this a day at a time, what happens is that on March 9th, we have that Mars trining Jupiter, and on the 11th, it conjuncts Uranus. We talked a little bit about that. These are days where if you have things that you've been wanting to do and couldn't get them off to a start, this is a time to start something new, to initiate action on a new project. On the 9th through the 11th, the 8th through the 12th. You know, the universe is not as exact as we astrologers would like to make it. On the 12th, Mercury changes signs. It moves from Aquarius into Pisces. And Mercury is kind of an anomaly in Pisces, because Mercury is communication, it's words, it uses analysis, and it uses language to talk about things specifically, and yet in Pisces it's more about dreaming. So Mercury in Pisces is not a time to write a technical manual. It's a time to smoke opium and write Kubla Khan like apparently S.T. Coleridge did. But that Mercury in Pisces it's about dreaming, and certainly there can be a fantasy side of Mercury in Pisces. However, as my friend and colleague Caroline Casey says, imagination lays the tracks for the reality train to follow. Imagination lays the tracks for the reality train to follow, and the higher use of Mercury in Pisces is to actually use the creative visualization imagination process to actually create something that conforms to that later on. I think of William Blake, who wrote, also in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, he wrote, what was once only what is now proven was once only imagined. What is now proved is what he wrote. What is now proved was once only imagined. So we have Mercury moving into Pisces, but we also have Neptune on a long-term stay in Pisces. So what happens is that as Mercury moves into Pisces, it begins to come into the kind of realm of Neptune, who's at home in Pisces, because Neptune is about imagination and dreams, and so we have Mercury over the following days aligning with Neptune, and that's exact on March 18th. However, as the universe gives, it taketh away. There are always currents within currents and cycles within cycles. And on the 17th, we have Venus, which had been moving along with Mars in fiery Aries. Venus is the first of the planets to escape, and it moves ahead into Taurus. And over the following weeks and months, Venus in Taurus will be followed by Mars, and then the Sun will move into Aries, and it will move into Taurus, and Mercury will move into Taurus. But right now we're getting a first wave of this Taurus energy starting on March 17th, when Venus, the planet of attraction, moves into her home sign of Taurus, and so this idea of spring feels good. Even though we've had an early spring already, or maybe no winter, I imagine that the second part of March will seem unreal as far as the pleasantness of weather, especially as Venus moves into Taurus. by March 25th, we have the sun forming a trine. The sun. Oh well, let's back up to the spring or vernal equinox. In fact, the new moon eclipse that I said we would talk about, we are now talking about. Let me do this so that we have this more exact. We can do this hour by hour and do. Okay, that's close enough. So the new moon eclipse occurs at 2:36 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time on March 20th. And here we have the sun and the moon lining up within range of the nodal axis. The nodes of the moon, you've heard us say before, the Earth goes around the sun, the moon is going around the Earth, and where these two planes intersect, that creates a straight line called the nodal axis. When a new moon or a full moon occurs close to the nodal axis, that's an eclipse. Either the sun hides the moon, either the sun casts the Earth's shadow on the moon at a full moon, or at a new moon, the moon comes between the Earth and the sun, which is what happens here on March 20th. And this is like energy flipping. It's like a polarization. Although ancient astrology never has anything good to say about an eclipse, you know, it was a different world then. You know, they didn't have a lot of things to say good about a lot of things. The fact of the matter is that eclipses are warp time. You can look at where an eclipse will fall in your chart, but the energy may not happen on that date. It can happen months before or months afterwards. It's almost like it sets up erratic energy that in some way releases tension. It changes things suddenly. Typically it's Uranian, meaning it's like lightning, things you don't expect, things that come out of the blue, things that happen not according to your plan, especially if you're the king. Because remember, the ancient prophecy is that, you know, at a solar eclipse, the king it falls from power. But this is a very interesting eclipse because, like the last new moon at the very last degree of Aquarius, this new moon eclipse is at the very last degree of the very last sign, Pisces. And so there's a huge amount of instability here. This eclipse, in some ways, is a turning point. Remember, we're already past the exact Uranus-Pluto square, and somehow we breezed over that. I'm just going to back that up so you can just see the exact degrees on the 16th, that we have Uranus at 15 degrees, 16 minutes, and here Pluto at 15 degrees, 17 minutes. It's, you know, 1 minute of arc from being exact here. But at the eclipse, they're still very, very close. So the Uranus-Pluto square is still in play, and yet this eclipse, in some way, it's a clean sweep of the energy. There's something here that says we're ready to move to something next. And it's important to understand that the following eclipse at the full moon, a couple of weeks later, the sun will be lined up exactly with Uranus. And so this whole thing of Uranus playing in here is very, very important. And it really sets up the power of change that is in all of our lives. We can resist screaming and kicking. It's the ancient Hopi prophecy. It says, don't hold on to the shore. Push off into the middle of the river where the water is moving fast, and keep your head above water and look around and see who's there with you, because that's your tribe. Rejoice, but go with the flow. Don't hold on to what you think you had. So this is the key to what's going on during this month. And I think that this eclipse in some ways sets that stage. On the 25th, we have the sun now having moved into Aries on the vernal equinox, which was on March 20th, the day just an hour after the eclipse, making that even more potent. But we have the Sun forming a harmonious trine with Saturn, which suggests that even though we're in a time of dynamic change, we can really make things stay. So here we are standing at a cusp. The word cusp is simply Latin for edge. People know cusp as the cusp between signs. But we are actually standing at a month that's a cusp between being in the center of this dynamic change and being on the other side of it, even though the intensity of these waves will continue to resonate and build for months, for years to come. The fact of the matter is that it's like an alloy. When you heat two different metals and you mix them together, while they're heated and while you're mixing them together, you can form them. But once they solidify, it's a different animal. And you can't melt it again and re-solidify it. So I'm calling on each of you, on each of us, because I am not separate from this group. I'm talking to me here also. This is a time, this month, March, when we're still in this state of alloys being liquid. And if we wait to make the big decisions that we want to make in our life, if we wait to take the action that we've intended to take for weeks or months or years, by April or May or June, it may be too late. So, as the Justice of the Peace once said, speak now or forever hold your peace. Thank you all for being here tonight.